Hello, today we are going to present our research on the economic geography of South Africa. Let me begin with providing an overview of the economic history of the state and tracking the transitions between the modes of production South Africa has passed through. The economic history of South Africa begins with the settlement of its territory by Bantu tribes. In the central South Africa, in its east and north, they had their primitive communities engaged in agriculture and ceramic craft. This is evidenced by archaeological finds of cattle bones and remnants of ceramic crafts in the East, Lander and Russell 2018 states. The neighbors of the Bantu in the southern and western part of South Africa were the San Bushmen, hunters with a nomadic lifestyle. Over time, the influence of the Bantu spread to wider territories. They mastered fishing, metallurgy about 700 CE, while maintaining a primitive communist society ruled by chiefdoms. The end of the 9th century was marked by the appearance of the Kingdom of Mapungubwe, a medieval state at the confluence of the Shashe and Limpopo rivers. It was a rich civilization, relying mainly on trade, as malaria and sleeping sickness prevented cattle breeding. The Mapungubwe kingdom had a strict social order consisting of three classes: members of the royal family and elite Americans on the top, commoners such as farmers, masons, etc., who paid taxes, and slaves at the very bottom. According to Elfes and Herbeck 1988, the state initiated the trade in gold and ivory, the production of jewelry and art objects, the import of glass beads, and Chinese ceramics. Now let's move on to the beginning of the European colonization. Initially, it wasn't planned as such. The Dutch East India Company needed a permanent parking point on the route between Holland and Dutch East Indies, modern Indonesia. Scurvy due to the lack of fresh vegetables and fruits, lack of fresh water was a frequent problem among the sailors of American trips, and in 1652, a permanent European settlement was founded in Cape Town. Conflicts with local tribes began. Part of the indigenous population began to die out from diseases brought by Europeans, as the Indians of South and North America has previously died out. Europeans began migrating east from Cape Town and came into conflict with tribes suffering from land famine. In the intervals between conflicts, trade between Europeans and Aborigines began to develop, and a black peasantry dependent on planters began to form. Colonization led to the emergence of previously non-existent production on the territory of South Africa. For example, artisan slaves brought from the Malay Islands marked the beginning of textile industry, now one of the main ones in South Africa. The Huguenots, persecuted in France, fled to South Africa and brought with them the skills of wine production. The Germans and the British greatly improved the farming skills of the local population. At the turn of the 19th century, the British occupied the Cape Colony and Natalia. The discovery of diamonds in Cape Province in 1866 and the discovery of gold 20 years later in the Witwatersrand transformed the economy and attracted a lot of foreign interest. The following diamond and gold rush led to further migration of a number of nationalities. There were no experienced personnel in the mining industry among the local population, and an active import of workers began. During the Great Depression, there was a sharp decline in prices. For example, the price of wool fell by 75% between 1925 and 1933. Afrikaner farmers and artisans who survived by selling goods massively went to the mines. In 1948, the Nationalist Party came to power, which introduced the policy of apartheid. Within 20 years, white Afrikaners began to rise sharply in social status to the detriment of other linguistic and ethnic groups of the population. On the positive side, since the 1960s, South Africa has had economic dominance over the rest of Africa and was considered the only developed country in Africa by the economic criteria of the United Nations. During this period, South Africa produced 2 times more electricity and 6 times more steel than the rest of Africa altogether. At the same time, non-white manufacturing workers earned 18% of the wages of white workers. Infant mortality rates among people of color were 13 times higher than among whites, and the level of accessible education was artificially lower for the oppressed races. Just 6% of national income was earned by the 30% of South African population. The rightless position of black workers made business super profitable, and industrialists improved their profit. However, international pressure was growing. Since 1962, the UN adopted a resolution on the fight against apartheid. South Africa was cut off from investment funds. Businessmen from South Africa were banned from investing in other countries, which eventually made the apartheid system unprofitable for the industrial elite. Since 1984, when the United States also imposed sanctions and restrictions on the movement of finance against South Africa, a powerful outflow of capital began. From 1980 to 1985, $9 billion was lost on the price level at that time. This caused a fall in the exchange rate of the South African currency, the rand. This meant an increase in the cost of imported goods, and then, because of that, inflation began at 12–15% per year.
In this part, I want to talk about the resources and economic and social structure of South Africa. Let's start. Speaking about resources, the most important are forestry, plucked land, fruits, fish, minerals such as gold or diamonds. The situation with the use of resources has not changed much. During the colonial period, gold, silver and other resources were exported from Cape Town to Europe, and now South Africa is a major exporter of minerals. The share of sectors in the country's GDP you can see on the slide. We can consider that since 2010 the situation doesn't change much. Also you can see the employment by sectors. Most people work in service sector. An important part of economy are tourism and financial services. The country's industrial sector began to develop in the 19th century with diamond mining. Major industries of the state are agriculture, food production, mining of platinum, gold, diamonds, uranium, and factories such as electronics, textile, chemicals, automobiles. Mining sector employs the biggest number of people in industries. Most of the industries are in the eastern part of the country because of the concentration of mineral resources there and difficulties with transportation. There are also fewer industries on the coastline so as not to destroy the tourism of the country. South Africa has about 21 million of working age population in 2020. The unemployment rate in the state is about 35%. The labor market isn't flexible due to the fragmentation of the general national labor market as well as state regulations and labor unions. By establishing a minimum wage and restrictions on the firing of workers raised unemployment. Moreover, the market is characterized by sexism. It is more difficult for women to find work and their salaries are usually less. The level of literacy in the country is quite high. The state is engaged in the development of this sector. The education system is divided into 3 stages and has high standards. However, there is a strong polarization of the population because the poor cannot pay for their children's education, because most of the institutions are commercial and differences between standards of education still exist due to historical factors. On the slide you can see some data on the social structure of South Africa. After studying the data in this pyramid, we can say that the country is at the 3rd stage of demographic transition due to the development of the economy, education and low mortality. One of the aspects affecting the growth of the country's population is the presence of poor citizens, as well as the migration from other African countries that have much worse life conditions than South Africa. The population density is increasing since 1950. The level of urbanization in the country has been growing since 2010, and now more than 67% of the population lives in cities. According to these indicators, South Africa is the most developed country in the African region. The population is concentrated in the industrially developed eastern regions of the country, which provokes unemployment. In conclusion, I want to say that the development of the South African economy was stimulated by a large number of minerals and other resources. According to social indicators, this country is the most developed in comparison with other African states. However, the economy is still most dependent on the sale of primary materials. Also, unemployment rates, polarization of society and gender discrimination are still high.
Thank you, colleagues. South Africa possesses significant regional power due to their financial and industrial development. The table compares South Africa and other 2 biggest economies in the region. It appears that South Africa is truly the economic center, making it a natural heart for any integrational project in the region. Nevertheless, such indicators as Human Development Index shows that Botswana, for example, has even better results. Yet it is compensated for South Africa by their natural resources and their geographical position. The South African economy is rather open to international trade. Their four main trading partners since 2012 have been China, United States, Germany, and Japan accordingly. In 2004, the European Union and South Africa signed TDCA treaty, which mutually liberalized their markets to incoming exports. This table shows how South African trade balance has changed since 2004. Trade balance has been positive overall, however the difference is virtually insignificant. Macmillan Statesman Yearbook 2019 says that main exports and imports are machinery and transport equipment, so the exchange is homogeneous. South Africa, as was stated before, really is the heart of regional integrational projects. Nowadays, we hold membership in such organizations as South African Development Community, SADC, which covers Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, and, what is more, Southern Customs Union, SASU, which covers even more countries. South Africa is considered to be an upper-middle country by GDP per capita. Despite being a well-developed country with financial and manufacturing systems, South Africa has several serious social challenges to face. According to Stats South Africa 2021, virtually half of South Africans live in poverty. What is more, South Africa has the biggest HIV/AIDS epidemic in the world. All these factors pose a serious threat to region's economic development as they increase government spendings and allocate resources from other spheres. For e.g., the government spends annually up until 5% of GDP on social welfare. As a result of the crisis caused by COVID-19, PricewaterhouseCoopers 2021 suggests in their annual report on South Africa that government's key priorities nowadays are consumption confidence and employment boosts. Considering the export-import balance and their position in the international trade, South African officials might apply import substituting industrialization, or EC, of machinery and transport equipment, and financial encouragement of young entrepreneurship.